Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third week of Career Month. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for this webinar. As you may know, each week over Career Month, we have been covering a different theme to help you prepare for the job search. And this week's theme is interviewing. So we have held mock interviews, we've talked about behavioral questions, and today we're going to be talking about what to do after the interview is over. How do you follow up? Martin McGovern of the careers team has joined us. He's a career advisor here at Udacity, and he will be spending the next hour covering this topic. At the very end, for the last 15 minutes of the webinar, he will be answering pre-submitted and live questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll either answer them there or Martin will answer them at the end. So with that, we will dive in and I'll pass the mic over to Martin so he can introduce himself.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. I'm really excited to chat with you today about what to do after the interview. We'll get into the slides in just a second, but as we get rolling, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Those are going to be coming my way. People will be answering in the chat as well as we'll be addressing them at the end. So to make this the most interactive conversation we can have, please toss all those questions that are buzzing in your brain into the chat, and we'll get to them as we go through the presentation. All right, at this time, I'm going to go switch over from my face here to the presentation, and we will jump right in. All right. I hope my screen is sharing well. If there's any technical difficulties, please type in the chat, and we will address them as we go. So today, we are going to be talking about what to do after the interview. A lot of people have a lot of worry around this area, and it's fair enough because the interview is a pretty stressful process. It took a lot of effort to get to the point where you got to walk through the door, have that conversation, and usually our typical urge is just to go take a nap afterward. But taking a nap isn't necessarily the right way to go. So today we're going to be talking about what exactly you should and maybe even shouldn't do right after the interview. So who am I? My name is Martin McGovern. I'm a career advisor here at Udacity. My background is in both marketing and career development. And so I bring both sort of a careers perspective and a marketing perspective to all of these things. So not only just how to do it, but how to do it in a way that persuades people and gets them to do what you want them to do, which is hire you. All right. I'm hoping that this is all of you at some point. If you haven't already gotten an interview and gotten to the other side, maybe you have one coming up very soon, or you're sending out those applications and crossing your fingers and hoping that one is coming your way in the near future. But hopefully all of us get to the point where we get to the interview, we have that conversation, we get through those nerves, we move, we chat it out, and we cross that finish line. And it really does feel like a finish line when you shake their hand at the end of that interview. But you then leave that room, and now you're just waiting with your hands open. We sort of hit that. Well, now what? Why didn't they just give me the offer while I was in the room with them? That would have made things so much easier for all of us. But they have lots of candidates that they're looking at, right? And they have to, talk to different stakeholders, and they have to compare different salary levels and different experience levels. And I was actually in the elevator today overhearing a conversation where they're like, well, this person's salary is too high, but they have great experience. This person's experience is a little lower, but their salary is in the right spot. There's a lot of things people are trying to consider when they're considering candidates. So there's a very, very good chance that you'll be waiting for a little bit, maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe 2 months. Hopefully not 2 months, but sometimes that happens. And you got to keep your energy up and your positivity up as you go through the post-interview process, because that's going to be when you start, struggling a bit and getting a little antsy. And this sloth is how we all feel after the high stress of an interview. You're in that room and the pressure is on. It's like giving a talk to an entire room of people. Meeting strangers is just tough in general, but meeting strangers in a situation like an interview where, there's a power dynamic and you're trying to impress them and you're trying to ask good questions and you're competing, it's a bit stressful. So you might want to go home and just be this sloth and take a nap. And maybe you do go take a nap. Maybe you take an hour break. But before you do that, I want to get into a few of the things that we're going to be going over in this presentation, because we are not done yet. It's not a finish line when you get to the interview. It's just the start of the hurdle portion of the race. So we're going to be talking about some of the hurdles you're going to come across and some of the hoops you're going to have to jump through in order to make sure that you land this job that you put so much effort into already. You don't want to put in all this pre-work, getting your resume right, going to networking events, meeting with people, doing informational interviews, applying to the job, going, maybe even traveling. Maybe you got flown out to the interview. You don't want to put all that effort in and then drop the ball at the end. You've seen those races where they have the batons, right? If you just miss that baton on the last leg, it's going to be a real disappointment. So we want to keep the energy going through the interview. All right, now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts. What do you do right after the interview? And when I say right after the interview, I'm talking directly after, like the second you shake their hand and say thank you. This is before you leave the building. Before you walk out the front door, a couple of things you want to make sure that you check off your list are, you want to make sure you said thank you to everyone. Specifically the person that you're talking to last, whether that's the final interview, maybe you had a series of interviews that day. Did you say thank you to everyone along the way? Are they in the surrounding area? Maybe, their cubicle is on the way out. You could just pop by, say, hey, it was great talking to you today. And also the receptionist, who was the person that was walking you around? Was there an intern walking you around or someone who works at the company? Thank them. Make sure that you say thank you to everyone before you go. And again, you don't have to chase people down, but just make sure that you're saying thank you and being very grateful the whole time that you're there that day. You want to make sure that you get everyone's contact information. Hopefully you were doing this after each point of contact that you had with the company. So maybe you go in for a series of interviews that day. After each interview, when they say, do you have any other questions? The best thing that you can do in that series of questions that you're going to ask is say, what is your contact information, and what is, and this is point number 3, the best way to keep in touch. Ask what their preference is. You don't want to be sending email if they prefer LinkedIn. You don't want to be calling if they prefer email. So you want to make sure that you're following up with people in the way that they prefer. So again, this is during and at the end of the interview. You want to be able to say, thank you. What is the best way to keep in touch? A lot of times people will say LinkedIn or email. Can I have your business card or your contact information? And then ask what their preferences are for future contact. Typically, if it's like future contact and not just specifically related to the job, it's LinkedIn. If it's specifically related to this role, it's email. So you'll see how it goes as you go through. But before you leave the building, make sure you do those 3 things. Then right after you get out the door, hopefully you're like this guy, you're so excited, right? You did it. But right after you walk out that front door and your nerves start to calm down a little bit, what you want to do, oddly enough, is just get away from the building. Just get out of the radius of the space where everyone that you just interviewed with is hanging out. A lot of times, you might just sit down in the lobby or something, and then one of them is walking out for lunch, and now you have a second awkward interaction with someone that you just had an hour-long conversation with. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a huge fan of just awkward interactions. So getting, 10, 15 minutes away from the building to sit down, compose yourself, and write down some notes is going to be really, really important. Which brings us to point number 2. You want to sit down and write out everything that happened during that interview. Now, this is important for a few reasons. It's important because you want to be able to, while it's still fresh in your mind, jot down anything that was interesting or anything that stood out to you or you had more questions on, or it was a good conversation, anything that really stands out that you can use when you send your follow-ups. So let's say you're sitting in the interview and they mention, we're trying to build a new product in order to break into a certain industry. that's a note you want to make sure you wrote down. Hopefully you wrote it down during the interview. If you didn't write it down during the interview, make sure you jot it down after so you don't lose all this great information. Because chances are there's another round of interviews coming your way, and you want to be able to reference back to things that you've talked about before. So sitting down and writing this all out is extremely important. One of my favorite things to do is to run to a coffee shop, sit down and just brain dump everything. Review my notes, brain dump all the points, all the questions, everything that I thought I did well, and some of the things that I might need to improve. And that's also a really important piece of this written recap. There might have been a few things that you stumbled on. If you sit down and say, well, here were the questions that I stumbled on, you can actually take those questions home with you. And now that you have them written down, practice them for future interviews. Because let's say this job doesn't work out. Now you have more questions, not just ones that you pulled from Google or the Muse or something like that. You have real questions that you've been asked in an interview that may come up again. So if you have the chance, try to remember all the questions they asked you so that later on when you're practicing for your next interview, you can add these questions to your practice. And so just to break this one down again, you want to write down the things that you thought went really well, the things that you're hoping to improve, the questions that they asked, and anything else that you think would be interesting information to mention in the future. And then number 3, you want to sit back for a second, let your nerves calm down, get over the excitement and the adrenaline, and start to ask yourself, how did I feel about that interview? How did I feel about the company? How did I feel about the way that they handled, moving me around? Was I sitting there for a half hour with nothing to do? Were people forgetting I was there? Were people extremely engaged? Was it a good vibe? Were the conversations I had really productive? Ask yourself how the fit felt from your side, because you're going to be evaluating them just as much as they're evaluating you. You don't have to take the very first offer you get. For instance, I had an interview years back where I had to get on a train, go out to the suburbs, take a shuttle from the train to another place. I had this interview in a tiny office. The people were great. The people were wonderful. All the conversations I had were really fascinating, but just the environment of that and the commute of that experience kind of showed me that this wasn't going to be the right fit for me. So when it came time to talk to them about offers, I just had to be honest and say, hey, for me, the long distance, my previous job had a 2.5-hour commute each way. I think the distance is just something that is, a priority for me. So I need to work somewhere closer to home. And so these are the types of things, like when you're assessing the fit, assess the entire experience. And so this is what's, and it's good to do this again, right after you walk out the door. Don't wait till you get home. Don't wait till a week later, because you won't remember these things. It'll all get muddled into everything else that's been going on. So just take a second, take 15 minutes, go to a Starbucks or whatever, and get all these things out of your head. Then you're going to get home. And when you get home, you're going to probably want to take a nap. You're going to be like that sloth in the first slide. And you're just going to want to turn on the TV, say, I did my work for today. I'm checking out. The only problem is that you've actually got a little more work to do. You need to send out your thank yous, preferably within the same day of the interview, because otherwise it's going to get lost in their inbox, maybe the next morning at the very latest, but you need to get on it, because that's going to be something that you're going to tend to procrastinate. Sending thank you notes it's not as easy as just typing thank you in a subject line and hitting send. You want to include some tips, some ideas from the conversation. You want to review your notes. It might take, depending on how many people you interviewed with, it might take a half hour to an hour, and you just went through all this adrenaline rush, and now you're on a downslope, and it's not something you're feeling like doing. But it's extremely important to maybe take take like a walk around the block and then sit down and knock this out so you get it done. You're not sending it out at midnight. You're not sending it out the next week. Number 2, you want to follow up with any recruiters or contacts that you had at the company. Maybe you had a referral follow up with your referral and say, hey, we just had the interview today. It went really great. I had a really interesting time talking with Ted and Mary and so on. And thank you so much for making those introductions. I'm super excited for the next steps. And then keep searching. This is the hardest part. A lot of times we get home, we had our interview, and now we're in the waiting mode, and we're like, all right, I'm just gonna wait and see if this job gets back to me. We stop applying, we stop going to networking events, we start focusing on other things. And then 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, maybe a month and a half later, we get that final, I'm sorry, this isn't the right time email, and suddenly we have to start all over from scratch. What you want to be doing is continuing to send out resumes, continuing to network, and making sure that the second this one falls through, you have an interview the next day. Because that's the nature of the job search. There is no guarantee. So no matter how much you feel like you killed it and how great this all, how good of a feeling you have for the future, you need to keep the search going. This is a great quote that I found online. It was, chances are you won't win the job based solely on a thank you note, but you will stick out like a sore thumb for not sending one. Don't be that person. And this, again, I think it's just, after that high adrenaline rush of the interview, sometimes we get so caught up we forget, or we're tired, or whatever the emotion is that sort of sneaks in. But thank you notes are honestly one of the most important pieces of the post-interview piece of your job search. And those people who don't send them, they do stand out. And maybe they stand out because the person on the other end is like, how come that person never sent a thank you note? But maybe they stand out because the person literally doesn't think about you anymore. And that is the last thing you want. The last thing you want is to just fall out of the person's mind completely. So you wanna, and this is what we're gonna talk about throughout the rest of the presentation, you wanna continue to find ways to stay top of mind. This is why social media, LinkedIn, and things like that are so important. Nike being on social media and constantly posting things every single day keeps Nike in your consciousness. If they can find ways. Oh, sorry, we had a bit of feedback there. If Nike stops promoting their product, we forget about them. And so they have to constantly find new ways to stay in the public consciousness. And it's the same thing for you. You have to find ways to stay in the consciousness of the people that you're trying to interact with. Of course, there's fine lines there, but we'll get into that. All right, now we're gonna get into the follow-ups and the thank you notes. You have 24 hours. The clock is on, the clock is ticking. This is an old TV show, but I mean, it's a great graphic for what we're talking about. You have 24 hours and the clock is ticking from the time you walk out that door to send your thank you notes. And the reason for that is, again, you don't wanna fall out of their mindset. You want them to stay on task. They might say, we'll get back to you by the end of the week. If you don't follow up, they're gonna forget to get back to you. And now you've gotten a tree of silence going, or a chain of silence going, where they don't remember you, you're not following up, and no one's communicating. Communication is one of the most important pieces of the job search. So you need to stay on top of things. So give yourself 24 hours at the max. Maybe the next morning so that it's top of their inbox, but get it out as soon as you can. I just like to get it done. Get it done, move on, go to the next item on your to-do list so that you don't procrastinate it. Because once you start procrastinating things like that, if a week goes by and you haven't sent a thank you, it's gonna be pretty awkward to send a thank you note. So just get it done, get it out of your head, get it out of the way, and don't worry about it. Here's a really quick follow-up rule of thumb. Because a lot of people say, how often should I follow up? I'm not really sure what I should be doing. The follow-up rule of thumb in my mind, and again, it's a rule of law. You want to follow up within 24 hours, and then you want to follow up in increments. So 1 week from the initial follow-up, you follow up again. So if you've not heard back within a 1 week period, you need to follow up. So if you emailed them a thank you note on Tuesday, and you get to the next Tuesday and you haven't heard anything, you got to send a follow-up. Now, if you send the follow-up the next Tuesday and you don't hear anything back, you wait 2 weeks and send a third follow-up. So now that's 3 weeks, or a second follow-up. So now that's 3 weeks, 2 follow-ups, and so on and so forth. We're at 4 and 6. Hopefully you don't get to 4 and 6. Hopefully you're able to get a response from them within the 1 to 2 weeks, 1 to 3 weeks of following up. And typically if you're at 6 and they've literally never responded to the last 3 emails that you've sent them, chances are you might want to call it a day and, maybe follow up a month from now. That's the 6. That's kind of that whole 6-4-6 thing. So, but definitely follow up within 24 hours, then within a week, then within 2 weeks, then within 4 weeks, and so on. Now, if you follow up within a week and they respond to that follow-up, you're back at 1. So once it's 1 week from the last time you were in contact with them. So if you just think about it that way, again, if you have questions, I can go into this in more detail, but it's more so a rule of thumb just to keep you, just to put a parameter around, like, I want to keep in touch, but I don't want to be annoying. So you don't want to be reaching out every single day. You don't want to be reaching out multiple times a week. You want to be reaching out every week, every other week, depending on the frequency of them responding. And again, there's a fine line between being enthusiastic and being annoying, so proceed with caution. The last thing you want to do is appear confrontational or desperate. And that's a big piece, confrontational or desperate. A lot of the follow-up procedure, a lot of the post-interview procedure is really just keeping a positive tone in spite of the anxiety that's going on. And that's kind of a brutal way to put it, but that is sort of the truth of the matter. You're going to get very curt emails. You're going to have a lot of distance between responses. They're trying to get their stuff together, and they are, dozens of people working in a company with almost their hair on fire trying to fill this role while doing other jobs. So they are heavily distracted. So if they say, I'm going to get back to you on Friday, and they don't get back to you till Monday, that's just the way it goes. Don't take it as a personal slight. Don't, reach out on Monday saying, hey, you said you were going to follow up on Friday. What happened? Or, hey, I'm really, 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 really excited for this job, but I never heard back from you. Like, that's the confrontational and desperate aspect of it. You just always want to do the middle, neutral, positive, right? You want to say, hey, I'm really excited for this job. I hope you're having a great week. Wanted to check in and see where the timeline's at and see if there's anything I can provide to be helpful. If you're always being positive and helpful, you're going to be in the right place. Now, here's a real quick story of thank you notes, because there's a lot of questions around emailing a thank you note or writing a handwritten thank you note and things of that sort. So typically what you're going to end up doing is just writing email thank you notes. Most of interviews now are digital or through Skype, things like that, and it's a little hard to do handwritten thank you notes when you don't know people's mailing addresses and desk numbers, and like, how are they going to get it if they work remote or something like that, right? So there's a lot of different things to keep in mind. But I want to tell a story about when I was in college, and I went to a series of interviews with this company, and it was for an internship. And I brought my handwritten stationery with me in my bag so that after I had these 3 interviews, I just went downstairs to the Starbucks, took out my stationery, and wrote 3 handwritten thank you notes for the 3 people I interviewed with. I brought them back up to the front desk. I asked the person at the front desk if they could drop them off on each of the person's desks. They did. And within a couple of days, I had that internship. And, I just thought it was, a neat thing. I had a wax seal and whatever. I was a real nerdy kid. But what was funny about this story is that years later, almost 12 years later, I got lunch with my boss who ran this internship, 12 years prior. And I was just blown away by what she told me. She said that she still had my thank you note on her desk. And that really blew me away. I was just like, that was just something I just thought everyone did. But apparently she has only ever received 1 handwritten thank you note in all the years of doing what she's been doing. And so it meant a lot to her. And that's why we were able to keep in touch after all these years, because I just did one little thing to go above and beyond. And she said that that thank you note was the reason I got the job. Like that no one else wrote a handwritten thank you note. And so of course that's the reason that I stood out from the pack. And this again, it's just little things. It's little ways to stand out. And I'm reminded of a quote, and it says, it doesn't take a lot to be a little better than the person next to you. And when you're in the final rounds of an interview, maybe you and 2 or 3 other people, you're all qualified for the role. So you have to ask yourself, what is going to make you stand out? And it's likely going to be positivity, going slightly the extra mile than the person next to you, and maybe following up that one extra time when everyone else gives up. And the things that I learned about this, the little things matter. Always go the extra mile and be different. It doesn't take a lot to be different. Just, if it seems creative, you don't have to go over the top. I've seen people design entire video games for their resume. I wish I had the skill to do that. I didn't, but a handwritten thank you note, that was my differentiator. Next, being patient and keeping in touch. So a lot of you are probably wondering, like, how long is it going to take to get the job offer? Is it a day, a month, a week? How long am I going to actually be waiting around? So I want to tell you a quick story of a long back and forth. And I'm going to literally just walk you through the back and forth of the email chain so you can see what it looks like and how to keep a positive mindset, even in the face of a lot of uncertainty and changes and even a no. So this actually ends in a no. But it's a really important thing to look at because it was an extremely frustrating experience to go through, but it ended in a positive way. So we'll just jump into it. So this whole interaction started on Monday, June 5th. I sent an email, and again, how do you have a positive tone? Take a look at this email. It was a pleasure chatting with you both today. Thank you so much for your time. What you said about the familial feel of the Austin office culture really speaks to me, and I'm excited for the opportunity to grow the community and build the brand with this role. I look forward to hearing back the next steps. Thank you again for your time and have a wonderful week. This person got back to me and said, thank you. You should hear from me by Friday, latest Monday, with next steps. I said, thank you. I'll keep an eye out. Then Friday came and went. So I reached out on the 12th. I said, checking in quickly on next steps. I'm excited to meet the rest of the team and continue the conversation. Is there anything additional I can send your way? So this is Friday came and went. Monday, I sent out my follow-up. So again, staying on point. Don't miss these deadline days. When they give you I will follow up by a certain day, follow up with them if they don't follow up with you. You can see I waited until 8:16 p.m. to follow up just to make sure I gave them a chance to send out their email. But I had a reminder in my calendar saying, this is when they said that we're going to touch base next. I'm going to make sure that we touch base even if I have to do it. Then Wednesday, June 14th. So I waited a couple days for their response. They thanked me for the follow-up. They need to let me know that they decided to make an offer to a different candidate who's local, and it was a very hard decision, and so on and so forth. They're sorry they couldn't make it work. Now, the nice thing here, again, and this goes into being flexible and being open-minded in the job search, the role that you go in to interview with may not be the role that you get. So they threw out, hey, we don't have that Austin position, but we do have one in San Diego. Wanted to see if this was an option. So I followed up and said, hey, that's in my list. I would totally be interested. What are the next steps in vetting that process? And again, now we're on the 15th almost. We're on June 14th. And I even tossed out, I'd be happy to fly out in order to meet the team if needed. So I'm even setting the stage for the next thing, always trying to set up the next step and the next part of the conversation. They responded. They said that they'll follow up early next week, but they need more info. And so any of you who are curious about negotiating, especially via email, typically negotiating and putting out salary numbers via email isn't a good tactic. But this was how I was communicating with this company at the time. And so I decided, I am going to let them know what my expectations are for the range of compensation. And I followed up on the same day. Again, you always want to follow up as immediately, as quickly as you can to them reaching out. So I followed up. I let them know, some of my salary history, what I was expecting, my flexibility in negotiating. And then I asked them a question. I didn't just put it there. I asked them, does this fit within your budgets? And always keeping a very positive mindset. They said nothing seems out of range. They'll follow up next week. Again, we're at June 16th now. So time is just going and going and going. They're working out some logistical things in San Diego, but they've closed the application window and they'll let me know. I said, thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing more next week. Excited for the opportunity. Then I heard nothing back. Again, this is like the most typical thing in the world. You just go back and forth. It's like a ping pong or tennis match. You're just like waiting for the email chain to end to know if it's a yes or no. So this whole time, we're half a month in now, I'm still just like, am I going to get the job? Am I not going to get the job? I have no idea. I don't know what's holding it up. I seem to be at the top of the list, but they seem to be hiring other people. There's so many questions, but I'm not going to show that in this interaction via email. I'm just going to be patient and follow up. So fast forward to the 23rd. I haven't heard back, so I send a follow-up. I hope you're having a great week. I know you're busy working out the logistics. I'm trying to be empathetic. And if there's anything that you need from me, please let me know. So again, I'm trying to be helpful here. I'm excited to continue the conversation. I look forward to hearing back on the next steps. And that's that phrase is one that I really love to use. I'm excited to continue the conversation. That way you're always setting up for the next email. So none of these emails are the end of the conversation. All of them are leading to more conversations. Then I heard nothing. And now time went by. So that was the 23rd. I waited a couple weeks, right? We hit July 5th. So I said, okay, it's a holiday week. Holidays are a time to wish people happy holidays. So on the 5th, I reached out and I said, I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July. Wanted to check in and see how things are going with the San Diego office, and also share a little fun thing. So this is going to get into how do you keep following up without just saying me, right? Well, one way to do it is to just share fun things. I could have shared anything in this email. I could have shared a fun article, an interesting tidbit from our conversation that I've thought about more, maybe an article that I've written. What I ended up sharing was an event that I was about to put on because I figured it would, paint me in a good light. I was putting on a career dog therapy, personal branding for your job search. Literally, we brought a bunch of dogs together and people complained about their job. It was a pretty fun event. And I mentioned that one of his coworkers who was in Chicago also had RSVP'd. So it was a reason it tied back into, the conversations that we'd had prior. So again, you're always keeping it positive, always trying to provide value. And 5 more days. Then I finally got back on July 10th. Thank you for getting back and sharing the link. They have to let me know that as of today, they're holding on making any new hire decisions. This is a long-term decision, so they want to thank me for my application and wish me the best. Now, keep in mind here, this ended with a no, but at least I got a no, right? I didn't let the conversation die. I didn't let it fizzle out. I didn't let it go on for months and months and months with no response. I pushed until I got an answer. And that's a lot of, what we're hoping for. When we get this far into a job search, we just want to know the answer more than we want anything else. And I think that that's one of the things that gets really tough is how do you continue to be positive until you can get that answer? And then what I ended up finding out, this is a very nice way to put it, but actually, and this is my response to the no is, well, it's fine that role doesn't exist for me, but how about we just connect on LinkedIn? And so now I have this person in my network. So even though I went through the whole thing and didn't get the job, at least I have a new contact. And then what I ended up finding out is that the company went out of business. So that's why they ended up not hiring for Texas. That's why they ended up not hiring in California. So it wasn't even me at the end of the day, right? And so these are the types of things that we struggle with, and we go through all this and we think, wow, they're maybe being flaky, or they're kind of pulling me through the ringer here, making me jump through a lot of hoops. But in reality, they were probably struggling with all their own stuff. They were probably trying to figure out how they're going to get this hire in, and then learning new things and trying to change and being like, but we've already interviewed these people. So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes you don't know, So you always want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's put it that way. And so my takeaways from this long back and forth is 1, always stay in touch. 2, always try to provide value, maybe a nice link to an article, something like that. And always stay positive, even if you're frustrated, even if it's taking a long time, and even if you eventually get a no. There's still benefits to be had after you hear no. And who knows, that no a year from now might become a yes. There's an unbelievable number of people who have stayed positive, stayed in touch with people that they interviewed with, because maybe it wasn't right at the time, but then a year later, they've learned new skills, they've gotten an internship under their belt, and boom, now they're in the role. All right, then there's messing up and trying again. There was this one time that I went on an informational interview. So this is a little bit different than an actual interview. It was one we were doing just a conversation or if they had a job for me. So it was very awkward. And what ended up happening was, they quizzed me. I'd done a lot of research on the role. Too much research, actually. I'd answered all my own questions and didn't know what to talk about. But I spent so much time researching the company, I forgot to practice my pitch. And so when they asked me to give a little pitch about myself, I froze. This is this is college. So I wasn't very well versed in interviews and things at the time. And so it went really poorly. And after choking on my words a few times, trying to start over, eventually I got a look from the other guy and he was like, I got work to do. So it's one of those things. It's like, we're going to have bad interviews and we're going to have to learn from them. So that was one of those things where, I had this terrible interview. It was maybe 15 minutes long. I had spent a half hour trying to get there and then a half hour to get home just for a 15-minute conversation that went really poorly. And it always stuck in the back of my head as something that I could come back from or, make up in the future. And so a few years later, what I ended up doing was reaching back out to that person that I had the informational interview with and saying, thank you so much for the learning experience. That was literally the subject line. And then it said, you probably don't remember me, but years ago, we had a really terrible informational interview and I learned so much from it. I'm currently working at a new company now and I'm doing marketing and it's going well. But I just wanted to say thank you for your time and the learning lesson. And they wrote back and they said, you're right, I have no idea who you are. Which honestly, from my perspective, I was so worried that I had totally screwed up my future after this terrible informational interview, that the fact that this person forgot who I am was a blessing. But what they ended up saying was, it seems like you've really grown over the years. Let's grab coffee and chat. And so we ended up getting coffee, chatting for 3 hours about marketing and staying in touch since then. So these are the things, people will forget your mistakes and you can always come back from them. And these are the big things that I want you to keep in mind when you're on an interview. If the interview goes really poorly, people will forget in 6 months to a year, and you can always try again. If it goes extremely well, they'll still forget certain things. So you want to remind them of things that you talked about. Number 2, no matter what happens in the interview, you can learn from it and do better in the future. This was one where I realized I had to learn how to pitch myself. And I continued to practice that for years and years and years until I got better. And number 3, there is always an opportunity to try again. Sometimes with that company, sometimes with a different company, more often with a different company. But you should never, ever give up, no matter how bad an interview goes. If you answer a question wrong or you didn't give enough detail, use the follow-up as an opportunity to fix the error and add more context. There's a great story I heard of a student who froze during a whiteboarding interview and they just couldn't come up with the answer. And they were someone who's very shy, very introverted, and they went home and were devastated that this didn't work out. But then what they ended up doing was spending the rest of that night, they pulled an all-nighter to research the topic, figure out the answer, put it together. I think they uploaded it to their GitHub and they sent it off to the employer and said, thank you so much for your time yesterday. I know that we hit sort of a roadblock in the interview where with this certain question, I just want to let you know that I went home, I did my research, and I built this for you in order to showcase what I'm capable of. Thank you again so much for your time. I look forward to, staying in touch and so on. That person got called back in for another interview because they showed that they had perseverance. They showed that they take initiative, and they showed that they're going to fix things when they don't know it. And that's half the battle is, we don't have the answers for everything, but if you're curious and dedicated and you'll find the answer, it shows that you're a hard worker and you don't give up. And then the other thing is to be flexible and help out. You're there to help them with problems. That's the entire transaction. They have problems, they need help. You have skills to solve those problems, they have money to pay you for those skills. That's a job. Simplest version of a job, let's say. So just a quick idea of my background with Udacity. When I originally went for this role, it was a completely different role. It was a full-time role, and over the years I've held a number of positions now. But my very first role with the company, what ended up happening was in the first interview, they said, "What would be your ideal workday?" And I just laid it out. I said, I'd be coaching students, I'd be doing X, Y, and Z, and this would be my ideal workday. I just very honestly laid out what I think my ideal day would be. And it was one of those moments where they said, "Oh, well, that's not exactly what this job is." And I said, "That's perfectly fine. What is the role, and what are the problems that you're looking to have solved?" And the funny thing about it is that we paused, and everyone just took a step back and said, "Well, actually, we need what you had laid out there. So let's get on the phone again in a couple of days. Give us a little time to put together a new job description, and let's see if we can make that happen." And this, again, is why you want to, be in conversation and looking for ways to help at every turn. You always want every roadblock to open up more questions. You always want every topic to be up for discussion, and you always want to be looking for how to provide more and more value. And so that turned into a contract role, which turned into a full-time role, which evolved into what I'm doing now, and so on and so forth. And that's why we're talking today. And so if you go in thinking it's this role or nothing, you're limiting yourself. Say, they need help with this role, which probably means they need help with a lot of different roles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and just ask lots of questions and see where they need the most help. I can't tell you the number of people who have been brought in for a certain thing, but then hired for something completely different. So always have a perspective on what you want. Realize that if it's not this role, then there might be another role that you're perfect for. And always think about their needs before your own. So you want to have your perspective, but if they don't need that, you want to be able to solve their problem anyway. So you always want to say, here is what I'm good at, and here's how it solves your needs. And then you want to pursue the job while also continuing the search. You never, ever want to stop your search. A lot of times we get super fixated on one company at a time, and we just put all of our effort into it. But that leads to a lot of panic, a lot of ups and downs with every email, and a lot of worry about whether this is going to be the one or not. Take dating apps as an example. They allow you to spread out your anxiety, so you're not totally worried about every single individual date that you go on. So don't fixate. You want to stay competitive. So you want to continue the job search so that, hey, maybe you get 2 or 3 offers at the same time, and you can use them to get the best offer. You can say, hey, I have competing offers. They're offering this much. Is there any way you could match that or compete with that? And some people find a lot of success being able to have that competitive advantage. If you have 2 or 3 offers, you're the one with the most control. And it also allows you to negotiate. So what I was saying there is if you have multiple offers in your lap, the negotiation stage becomes simple. It's not, this is my only opportunity, I have to take whatever they give me. It's, I have multiple opportunities. Which one is going to be the best for me? Which benefits are the best? Which salary is the best? Are there any bonuses? So on and so forth. And you can actually negotiate at that point. And then here's some post-interview mindsets to keep top of mind. 1, the company needs your help. They wouldn't be talking to you if they didn't have problems that needed to be solved. So a lot of times we go into our post-interview just with that sort of desperate mindset. I need a job. I need this. When really you should be saying, they need me because I can solve their problems. If you always look at it from that perspective of they need me because I can solve their problems, you're going to be in a much better spot psychologically. Realize that you can help. Look at your skill set and be very honest with yourself. This is what I'm able to do, and I can do it for them. I've done it before, I'm doing it currently, and I want to continue doing it somewhere, so it might as well be here, and I know I can help them with their problems. And also keep in mind that they mean well. No company wants you to fail. They want you to be the right hire. So if you're going in and you're just like, wow, they're just trying to run me through the ringer and see what happens, it's not in anyone's benefit for you to fail at the job interview. It's in everyone's benefit for you to do a great job. So when you walk in that room, whoever's interviewing you, chances are they really, really want this to be the last interview that they have to do for the day so they can get back to work. So they are crossing their fingers and hoping that you're going to crush it. So if you go in and say they mean well, we're all here for the same purpose, to solve problems. How can we solve problems? And don't take things too personally. And then realize that no is not the end. It's just the opening for another conversation, maybe a future conversation, maybe a different role at the company. Who knows what it might be? And then some clever ways to keep in touch. One, reference topics in your follow-ups. So maybe you talked about a certain technology during your interview. You know, find some articles or find some meetups where they're talking about that technology and share it and say, hey, I saw this, it made me think of our conversation. I thought you might be interested. Again, you can send articles, suggest events, share news, share things that you're building. All of this stuff is very clever ways to keep in touch so that your emails are more interesting than just, hi, do you have a job for me yet? It's actually much more engaging. And then that's sort of the bulk of the presentation, and I'm going to end with a sad but true story and also kind of funny thing that you should never, ever do after the interview. So this is Naomi, and I don't know if any of you saw this happen recently on Twitter, but Naomi got on and she said, everyone shut up, I got accepted for a NASA internship. Then Homer Hickman got up and said language. Naomi said some things that I'm not going to repeat on this webinar. And he said, oh, and I'm on the National Space Council that oversees NASA. Sad side to this story, Naomi did not end up getting that internship. So again, be professional. Always be professional. Online, offline. Don't run out that door and start, jumping and screaming. Be very calm, collected. Go to a coffee shop and write down your thoughts. These are the things that are going to set you up for success so that you're not getting, blindsided by a weird tweet. All right. That's our presentation today. Coming up next, making a career change on Monday, September 17th with Amelia. So make sure that you sign up for that and mark it in your calendars. And then I'm going to now open it up for questions. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. Sorry, I went a little bit long today, but I'm excited to hear what has been going on in the chat and answer anything that is on your mind.
Thanks, Mark. Oh, that last story is sad and funny, but that's a learning lesson for all of us.
Professional excitement. That's what you should be expressing.
Yes, exactly. All right, so we have a few pre-submitted questions and live questions. So I'm just going to dive right in since we only have a little bit of time left. Someone asked, should you reapply for jobs? And maybe you could speak to how to handle that if you do in your communications with the company.
Of course. I think it depends on how soon. If you applied for a job and didn't hear back or didn't get it, and then you wait a week and you apply for it again, and then you wait a week and you apply for it again, it's not very beneficial because they already have you in the system. If it's maybe a year or two later and you've learned some new skills and you've gotten another internship under your belt or built a new project or something along those lines, I think it might be beneficial to apply for that job, but probably more beneficial than that is to reach out to people who have that job, who work at that company, and talk to them and try and get a referral. Because if you didn't get through the scanning process the first time, you might need a little boost. You might need someone on the inside to pull your name out of the hat. And the reason you might not be getting through is just because there's hundreds and hundreds of people applying. So again, it's always better to get in through a referral. Companies always start with referrals before they move to the job boards. So I wouldn't just continually go to the same thing over and over and over again online. I would change up your tactics a bit and see if you can find a different way in.
I think that's good advice. Obviously, applying to the same job repeatedly probably isn't going to land you the job, but I think it's good advice to say if something's changed, whether that's time has passed or you have a new project in your portfolio or you feel like you're a better fit, then absolutely. The next question we have for you is, do we tell during the interview process that we are interviewing with other companies? Do we share that information?
Do we tell them that we're interviewing for other companies? I think the assumption is that if you're interviewing with this company, you're interviewing with many companies. And so I don't think you have to be explicit about it. And I'm trying to think how that would come up in conversation. If they ask you point blank, I think honesty is always a great way to go. Say, yes, I'm chatting with a few companies right now. But again, probably saying less is more in these situations. You don't want to go on and on and on about it. Just say, yeah, right now I'm chatting with a few companies. And so when you get to the offer stage, if you have multiple offers, that's when you're going to have to really sit down and say, how much do I want to share? Do I want to try and leverage one offer to get more from another and things of that sort? Which that's more in the negotiation side of things, and definitely a deeper topic to get into because there's a lot of pros and cons and strategies there. But in general, I wouldn't just blurt it out. I wouldn't just, say it unprompted because I think the assumption is there. If you're applying for this job and interviewing for this job, you're likely talking to many companies.
Totally. And actually, I'll plug for our webinar next week with a recruiter here at Udacity. She's going to be talking about negotiating the offer. So that might be something she can speak to as well. Just the process of if you have two offers or you're interviewing someplace and got an offer somewhere else, how to handle that situation. So join us at 7 p.m. on the 20th. I'll put the link in the chat as well so everyone has it. The next question is, what types of questions should we ask the employer during the interview?
That's a great question. So the first thing I'll say is there are tons of lists online of good questions to ask. If you go to themuse.com, they have great lists. That's a good starting point. But asking good questions is actually a skill set. It's not so much, a rote list that you just go down. So if you think about it, again, using a dating metaphor, if you go to a date with a list of questions that are unrelated to each other and you just go down the list and you're like, what's your favorite color? How many people in your family? And you just like read off unrelated questions, it's awkward. It's an awkward conversation. But if you ask questions that relate to what you're talking about, it's much, much better. So if they said something offhanded like, oh, we're thinking about breaking into a new industry, or we're going to incorporate a new type of coding software, whatever the thing might be, latch onto those little things and say, I want to know more about that when we get to the end. And you can say like, hey, earlier you mentioned that you're trying to, I don't know, let's say it's WeWork. You're trying to expand into new cities, or you're trying to expand into education, or you're trying to do X, Y, or Z, or hey, you took meat off the menu. Like, what's that about? How's that changed the culture of the company? Are people happy about it? Like, you can ask questions about, the news, about the industry. You can ask, the main thing that you want to get across with your questions is that you're a curious person who wants to learn. And so if you're asking questions that are exploring your own curiosities in relation to the industry and the job, you're going to be on the right track. But I would highly recommend you go on informational interviews, one-on-one coffees with people who work in the industry, and practice there first so that when you get to the interview, you're really, really, good at asking questions and engaging in a conversation.
Yeah, I think that part about finding content like during the interview that you can relate back to is great, because I think sometimes that you can just come with your list of questions. It's very uncomfortable. And when all of your questions are answered during the interview, what do you do?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and don't wait until the end if you have questions. The best interviews are the ones that are a dialogue. So if they ask you a question, so this is the typical interview situation. It's, here's a question, like, what's a time that you struggled with a coworker? Here's my answer of a time that I struggled with a coworker. Silence. And then they pull up their sheet that they printed off Google, and they go, what is your biggest strength? And you go, my biggest strength is, and then it's silence. What you want to do is have it be a dialogue. So they say, like, what's a time that you've struggled with a coworker? You tell your story about struggling with a coworker, how you overcame it, what your success was, so on and so forth. Then you say, and I've just noticed that, like, open workspaces are a little bit challenging. Have you noticed that? Do you have an open workspace? Is it a cubicle space? Like, are there offices? Are people remote? Does remote get in the way? Like, now you've got 10 questions. Like, do people work remote at your company? Does that cause issues? How do you handle it? Do people Skype? Do people chat? Do they have Slack? Boom, you've got a dozen questions off that one bit of information.
Yeah, that's great. My next question for you is, as an interview ends, should the interviewee send out some feelers trying to judge how interested the company is in hiring them?
That is a very interesting question. It's hard to say. It's hard to say because I'm not sure what you mean by feelers. If it means by saying, like, how do I rank against, like, other candidates today? I've personally never done that. I think a question that is really good to ask is, what would make someone great in this role? Like, what did the last person who had this role do that you thought made them really good at it? So asking that question opens up, like, the conversation to say, oh, wow, those are some skills that I have as well. And in your follow-up email, you can say, you mentioned that these are the types of skills that make someone great at this role. Here's a couple examples of me, of my past experience and my skill set in that area. So conflict resolution, or like being able to handle interpersonal conversations or something like that. Maybe that's what makes that role so great, and you can reference it in your thank you note. And then another thing would be, I believe I've asked this in an interview before. What are the things that you've seen so far that you think would make me good for this role, and where do you hesitate? And I think the hesitation question is personally my favorite, of, like, where are you hesitant? Because then you can actually address it and say, like, oh, I understand that hesitation. Here's my approach to it. So in the past, I believe, let's say the topic, I don't know, I'm just gonna make something up. Let's say they're like, well, you're really strong in your ability to execute, but we don't know about your management experience, right? You can say, I understand that. And here is, my limited experience with management and how I intend to get better at it over the next year. So regardless of this role, I'm gonna do these steps personally to get better at this. And this role will be a way that I can apply those things that I'm learning.
I'm just going to try and cram in one more question.
Sure.
We've got literally a minute, but well, that's all right. If you messed up in an interview not long ago, how would you follow up? Would it be bad to try again at the same place? How would you reach out to them?
That's an interesting question. I think if you really messed up, and I think I would need to know some more specifics about exactly what you mean by messed up. If you haven't followed up and it's been over a week, and this is kind of the thing. This is why you need to follow up within 24 hours. So that example I gave of someone who messed up the whiteboarding interview, went home that night, created some sort of rebuttal, let's call it, and then sent that back. It shows initiative, it shows timeliness, it shows all these different things. If you had a bad experience in an interview, went home and went radio silent for a week or a month or more, coming back out of the blue, out of nowhere, and just being like, oh, hey, I'm back, and I want to start the conversation again, it's likely they've already started moving on. If you have already sent a thank you and things like that, and you're just not hearing back, there's the chance of, like, saying, hey, I built something new, so let's look at it from that perspective. Maybe there's something that you can build that relates to the company, what they're trying to solve for, with the problems that they have. You can spend the next week or next few days building something that would be interesting, and then emailing your contact there and saying, hey, I just built this new thing. It related to something we talked about a couple weeks ago. I thought you might be interested in taking a look at it. Are you still looking? And then saying, are you still open and looking for people for this role? If so, I'd love to continue the conversation. It may not work. It may work wonderfully. But at the end of the day, worst case scenario, you have a new project that you can showcase to other companies. So again, don't get too hung up on any one company. If you feel like you totally messed up and you're just like, I'm just like beating myself up over this, just move on to the next one. There have been plenty of times in the past where I've been like, wow, I really flubbed that one. Let's put it in the notes of learnings and apply to a new company and see if that goes better. And then when you talk to the new company, you can adjust what you're doing so that you don't make the same mistakes again.
I really liked your example earlier of your informational interview that didn't go very well, and then you followed up years later. I think obviously years later it's a little easier because time has passed, and but I think there's some value to that in saying, hey, like, it didn't go very well, and that's okay. It's okay that it didn't go very well. I think that shows humility and perseverance. Maybe not immediate follow-up, but I just think that's a really good example. And if I got an email like that from someone, I would say, hey, like, they still remember me. They cared enough to send me an email. They're willing to say that it didn't go super well, and they want to reconnect. That's shows a lot of initiative. So anyway, I just really like that example.
Absolutely. And to add to it, I think, just to give a personal example, I actually had an interview that didn't go, or I had a negotiation that didn't go well, and the job never happened. And but the contact that referred me for the job, I felt so terrible. I was like, they referred me for this job, the negotiation didn't go well. This is a while back and whatnot. And I was like scared to like ever talk to that person again, because I'm like, did I totally like embarrass them, make them look bad, whatever it might have been. And so I ended up reaching out and just saying, hey, I just want to say thank you again for being so great and so nice. I got to that end of the rounds there. It just didn't really work out. I hope that didn't reflect poorly on you, but I just wanted to make sure I said thank you, and I hope you're doing well, and so on and so forth. And they responded back like, I never even thought a second about it, So a lot of this stuff is in our head. And so if you're worried about things, just say thank you and be positive and apologize or whatever you need to do to make yourself feel a little bit better about it. And you'll realize the other person probably isn't even thinking about it that much.
Yeah, it's just to make yourself feel better at that point.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope we got a lot of your questions answered in the live chat. But thank you for joining us, Martin, and everyone who was able to come for this past hour. I hope that it was beneficial to you and you learned something new. This will be recorded at the exact same link, so you can follow it if you want to see the recorded version. Our next webinar will be on Monday, the 17th, with Amelia Lynn at 1 p.m. PST, and she will be talking about her experience as a career changer and her top strategies for experiences on what works and what doesn't, and how to get your foot in the door when you make that switch. So join us. She is a wealth of knowledge, and it should be a great webinar. We will post the information for that webinar both in the chat as well as the description and comments, so you should be able to find it. I'll also make sure to include the link to Denise's webinar next week on your negotiating your offer. Thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.